It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the wedding I had dreamed of for years. Our ceremony in Chicago was meant to be filled with joy, surrounded by friends and family, celebrating love, but it quickly became a nightmare that shattered everything I believed in. The ceremony itself went perfectly, the music was soft, the flowers beautiful, and the guests all smiled with happiness. I was overwhelmed with excitement. Daniel and I had spent months preparing for this day, and I was eager to start our life together, but as the evening wore on, things began to unravel. It all started when Daniel's mother, Mrs. Thomas, approached me with an icy look on her face. In her late 50s, she had an intimidating presence that commanded attention. "Jessica, we need to talk," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I followed her to a quieter corner, unsure of what she wanted, but her anger was evident. "You've been disrespectful today," she hissed. "You've made a fool of me in front of everyone." I was stunned. I hadn't done anything wrong. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She didn't give me a chance to explain. "Don't play innocent," she snapped. "You think you can just waltz into this family and do whatever you want? You're a disgrace." Just then, Daniel, who had been mingling with the guests, walked over. He looked between his mother and me, his face unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone already suggesting he knew what was happening. "Jessica has been disrespectful," Mrs. Thomas said, her voice rising. "She's ruined everything." Before I could respond, Daniel's face twisted in anger. "Is this true?" he demanded, his eyes sharp. "Have you been causing trouble?" "No," I said, my heart sinking at his words. "I've done nothing wrong. I was just trying to enjoy our wedding." But his eyes grew cold. "You've made a fool of me and my mother," he spat. "This is unacceptable." His words hit harder than I could ever have imagined, but what followed was worse than anything I had expected. In front of everyone, Daniel raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The sound of the slap echoed, and my entire body went numb. The room went silent. Guests exchanged awkward glances, but no one intervened. Mrs. Thomas watched with a smug smile, as though she had won. "You're a fat woman who's dishonored my mother," Daniel yelled, his voice venomous. "I can't believe I married someone like you." I stood there, frozen. Tears welled up in my eyes as the faces around me blurred. I wanted to run, to disappear, but I was paralyzed by the shock and humiliation. The guests slowly resumed their conversations, completely oblivious to my suffering. The music and laughter mocked me. After what felt like an eternity, I gathered the strength to leave. I excused myself from the reception and retreated to a quiet area, away from the crowd. The tears flowed freely now, as I tried to make sense of the night. The dream wedding had turned into a cruel nightmare, and the reality of my marriage was becoming painfully clear. Daniel's behavior, and his mother's, was a glimpse into a toxic, abusive dynamic I had failed to see. I couldn't let it define me. As I looked at my reflection in the dim light, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't remain a victim. I would fight back. This wedding, which was supposed to mark a new beginning, had become the turning point of my life. The pain and betrayal ignited something in me. I wasn't going to let their cruelty break me. I was going to expose the truth and seek justice, no matter how difficult it would be. In the weeks that followed, I walked through a fog of pain. The humiliation from Daniel's public outburst was still fresh, but what hurt most was the realization that my marriage had been a lie. Despite the pain, I knew I couldn't let Daniel and Mrs. Thomas dictate my life. I needed to take control. The first step was gathering evidence. I knew I needed more than just my word to expose them. I hired Detective Charles, a private investigator known for his discretion. After a brief meeting, he agreed to help. "I understand how difficult this must be for you," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We'll get to the bottom of this." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I'll do whatever it takes. I want the truth to come out." Detective Charles began his investigation, and I started recording conversations with Daniel and his mother. It was uncomfortable, but I knew it was necessary. I kept a small recorder in my purse and captured every interaction. One evening, Daniel and I had a heated argument. I had the recorder running. "You're so useless," he sneered. "Why can't you do anything right?" "I'm doing my best," I said, trying to remain calm, "but you're always so critical." His response was cold. "Your best isn't good enough. You're a burden on me and my mother. Everyone can see it." The more I listened to these recordings, the more I realized the depth of their cruelty. It wasn't just that night at the wedding, it was an ongoing pattern of emotional abuse. I started to see the full extent of their manipulation, and my determination to expose them grew. Meanwhile, Detective Charles had been investigating their financial activities. He ran background checks and scrutinized their accounts. A few weeks later, he came to me with alarming news. "I found some troubling transactions," he said, his face serious. "It looks like Daniel and Mrs. Thomas may be involved in financial fraud." My heart raced as Detective Charles explained the details. "There are large sums of money moving between accounts. They might be embezzling funds." The revelation was shocking, but not entirely surprising. Daniel was a financial advisor, and Mrs. Thomas was deeply involved in his business. Their cruelty wasn't just emotional, it was criminal. I knew I needed more than just these financial records to bring them down. The recordings were vital, but I needed to consolidate everything. That's when my best friend, Rose, stepped in. Rose had been my rock through this whole ordeal. When I shared the evidence with her, her reaction was one of disbelief mixed with resolve. "We have to do something with this," she said, looking through the documents. "This goes beyond just you. They're committing serious crimes." Together, we analyzed the evidence, cross-referencing the recordings with the financial records. It was exhausting, but empowering. With each new detail, I felt more determined. One night, as we reviewed the papers, Rose looked up and smiled. "Jessica, you've come so far," she said. "You have the evidence. Now it's time to take the next step." I nodded, anxiety and resolve mixing inside me. "I'm ready. They need to be held accountable." Our plan was to organize an event where I would expose Daniel and Mrs. Thomas publicly. It would be terrifying, but it was the final step in my transformation from a victim to someone ready to fight for justice. As the event day approached, the weight of what was to come pressed heavily on me. Beneath the fear, however, a fierce sense of justice and a need to regain control of my life drove me forward. With Detective Charles's guidance, Rose's unwavering support, and the evidence we had carefully collected, I felt ready for the battle ahead. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought me to this moment of truth. I was determined to expose the lies and stand strong, no matter the cost. The day finally arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. I had meticulously organized every detail of the event, ensuring everything was perfect. The grand hall was stunningly decorated, exuding elegance yet standing in stark contrast to the shocking truths I was about to reveal. Family, friends, and media were all invited, ensuring the truth would be witnessed by as many as possible. As guests began to arrive, a swirl of nerves and determination filled me. The room hummed with curiosity and excitement, but my stomach fluttered with anxiety. Daniel and Mrs. Thomas stood by my side, wearing confident smiles, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. The event began with speeches and toasts, setting a celebratory tone. I played the role of gracious hostess, though inside, I felt like an actress in a drama. Taking deep breaths, I steeled myself for the moment that would change everything. When the time came, I approached the podium. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I saw Daniel and Mrs. Thomas exchange glances, their smiles fading slightly, though their curiosity remained. I gathered my thoughts, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you for being here today," I began, my voice steady, though filled with emotion. What was meant to be a celebration of new beginnings has evolved into something much more significant. The crowd leaned in, intrigued. "What I'm about to reveal has been hidden for too long. It's the truth behind the mask that Daniel and his mother have so carefully maintained." Daniel's smile faltered, suspicion growing in his eyes. Mrs. Thomas's face remained neutral, but I could feel the tension in the air. I took a deep breath and pressed the button on the remote, causing the large screen behind me to flicker to life. On the screen appeared a series of audio recordings and financial documents. The first recording played an argument between Daniel and me. His cruel words rang through the hall. The emotional abuse I had endured laid bare for all to hear. The room was silent, guests shocked as they listened to Daniel belittle and insult me. Next, the screen shifted to financial documents uncovered by Detective Charles. They revealed large sums of money moving between accounts, proving the fraudulent activities Daniel and Mrs. Thomas had been involved in. The evidence was undeniable. As the recordings and documents were shown, Daniel's face drained of color. His eyes flicked nervously around the room, realizing the full scope of what was unfolding. Mrs. Thomas, flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment, stood frozen. The truth had come to light. A surge of power ran through me as I continued. "These recordings and documents are proof of the abuse and fraud Daniel and his mother have inflicted on me, and many others. They've manipulated people for their own gain, And now, the truth is here for all to see. The media took notes, capturing every word. The mood in the room shifted from celebration to shock and outrage. Guests murmured in disbelief, and I felt their support shift toward me. Daniel, clearly rattled, attempted to protest, his voice quivering with a blend of anger and fear. "This is absurd," he stammered. "These are lies, distortions. You're trying to destroy us." But his protests were drowned out by the weight of the evidence. The guests, now fully aware of the truth, voiced their anger, expressing their disapproval of Daniel and Mrs. Thomas. The room buzzed with indignation, and I felt a profound sense of justice wash over me. As the event neared its end, Daniel and Mrs. Thomas tried to leave, but the media and guests blocked their exit. Their carefully constructed image had collapsed, and they were forced to face the consequences of their actions. I watched as the reality of the situation sank in. Their facade was shattered, and the truth was on display for all to see. For me, it was a moment of triumph, a significant step toward reclaiming my life. The event had successfully exposed Daniel and Mrs. Thomas, but it was also a deeply personal victory. I had taken control of my story and fought back against the injustice I had faced. In the days that followed, the media coverage was relentless. The truth about Daniel and Mrs. Thomas spread quickly, with public reactions ranging from outrage to support for me. I became a symbol of resilience and justice, but I knew my journey wasn't over. The media frenzy grew, and Daniel and Mrs. Thomas were under intense scrutiny. Investigations into their financial fraud were launched, and their lives were examined from every angle. The confident duo now faced a legal battle that threatened to destroy their wealth and reputations. While the media focused on them, my fight was far from over. I worked closely with my lawyer to ensure justice was served. Together, we built a strong case, collecting all the evidence, recordings, documents, and testimonies, so the truth would prevail. The courtroom was daunting, but I stood firm. As the trial began, I took the stand, recounting the abuse and fraud I had suffered. Each day was emotionally taxing, but I was resolute. Though the process was painful, I drew strength from my journey and from the support of those who believed in me. Daniel and Mrs. Thomas tried to defend themselves, but their arguments crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Their attempts to discredit me were futile. The financial documents and recordings spoke for themselves, and their credibility disintegrated. The trial reached its climax when the judge delivered the verdict. Daniel was found guilty of financial fraud and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. Mrs. Thomas faced legal repercussions, including fines and a tarnished reputation. The judge granted me a divorce, recognizing the emotional abuse I had endured. The victory in court was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the process had drained me. I was exhausted but relieved. The emotional scars would take time to heal, but I had found closure. With the legal battles behind me, I chose to start anew. I moved to a quiet home outside Austin, away from the chaos of my past. The peace and solitude allowed me to reflect on my journey. Sitting on my porch, watching the sunset over the hills, I realized how far I had come. It had been a difficult road, but one that had led me to empowerment and strength. I had reclaimed my life and stood up for what was right. I was deeply grateful for the unwavering support of Rose and Detective Charles. They had been crucial in helping me expose the truth. The transformation from victim to victor had been profound. I had faced the darkest moments of my life and emerged stronger than ever. Looking out at the tranquil landscape, I felt peace. The past was behind me, and the future was full of possibilities. My story was one of resilience, empowerment, and justice, a reminder that no matter how dark the times, one can rise above and take control. I had faced my demons, uncovered the truth, and emerged victorious. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me to a place of peace and fulfillment. With the past behind me, I embraced the future with hope and determination. I had taken control of my destiny, proving that even in the darkest times, one can find the strength to shine. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Stay stunned.